I would like to introduce to you Mr. Solomon Parker. He comes here at great expense and from large distances
Couldn't get much further.
to instill in us his wisdom. He is a long-term beekeeper who loves what he does. He's going to tell you his story, how he got bit by the bug, as I'm sure everyone here has a story of why you're here and how the bees got you here. So without...
He's been up since early.
And so without any more ado, please welcome Mr. Solomon Parker.
Yeah, I got this also. I couldn't get the remote to work, so I got my mouse.
There you go.
Yay!
So that'll work. Yeah, has anybody ever gotten the question, you ever get bit? Yeah, this is something you got to explain, that bees sting, they don't bite so much.
I got bit.
You got bit?
It crawled under my arm and just was under the tender part of the skin and it nipped me.
Well, there you now. See, now you have a story to tell. See, that's what this is all about, is having a story to tell. Remember that time when I got stung 40? Yeah, it happens all the time. I've got great stories about my firstborn son. His first experience with bees was he went out to the bee yard, and I was out there working, and he was watching me, and I had my back turned. I don't know what happened, but he ended up with about 24 stings all over his face and neck. He had like stuck his face in the beehive, but he survived, which was good.
He had the EpiPen just in case.
Yeah, it's always good to have an EpiPen around. All my kids we know are not allergic, so we do have EpiPens. They're kind of expensive, so if you can get them through insurance, definitely have one on hand. Thank you to Kevin and Carol, who are hosting me. They've been fantastic hosts, been plying me with food and drink. And to Gabriella for inviting me. Thank you. I'd never expected to get invited all the way down to Florida, so this is exciting for me. Never really been here before. Had a layover in Miami once, but that's it.
Did you have to bring the 5 kids?
I didn't bring the kids, no. They were actually, my wife and the kids were actually in Tampa in June visiting her sister, so they've been here. I wasn't here at the time. About myself, I have been beekeeping for about, over 15 years now. I started in 2003. I had just graduated college or high school in 2002, and decided that we had a commercial beekeeper who lived down the road, and I thought, well, maybe I could do beekeeping as a job. And so my family motto is, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. And so I started out with 20 packages of bees. So my first day was a big day. I got up at about 3:30 in the morning, and I drove from Medford, Oregon down to Orland, California to pick up those 20 packages. Drove all the way back, installed all of them, managed to get stung a couple of times. I'm sure y'all are familiar with that on your first day installing packages and stuff. And been a beekeeper ever since. Now, I didn't end up becoming a commercial beekeeper because I got married and went to college and did all that stuff, but I have kept it ever since then as a hobby, or as I like to say, I'm an avid hobbyist.
How many hives now?
I keep around 24. I can't be bothered to count, actually. With my beekeeping style, it's a little more hands-off. It's a little more focused on the enjoyment of the hobby rather than trying to maximize production and minimize losses.
How often do you go in?
I go in, if you average it out over the year, it's probably about once a month, but most of that is focused around in spring and early summer. Around this time of the year, we start getting into dearths. Where I am, we have virtually zero rain between May to September. So obviously we tend to have a pretty healthy fire season. And I've actually been working fighting fires this year, so that's exciting also. Only nearly caught on fire once, so that was good.
Almost as bad as getting stung.
Yeah. A little bit of smoke inhalation, but I'm okay. What else was I going to tell you? Oh, my main thing is that I'm a treatment-free beekeeper. Sorry? Okay, sure. That works better, doesn't it? So I'm a treatment-free beekeeper. I decided when I first was doing my first research into beekeeping in the fall of 2002, I discovered that there were people out there in the world who kept bees without treatments, and I wanted to be one of them. I've heard Michael Bush has been here to speak to you guys. You guys enjoy him? I like Michael. We cross each other's paths about once or twice a year at various beekeeping events, so we hang out sometimes. He had just succeeded in getting his first winter treatment-free without losing all of his bees. So that was his first winter. So I had seen him online, and initially I thought he was a bit of a know-it-all, but then later on I wised up and I figured out he does know quite a bit. So give him credit where credit's due. And there was also D. Lesby in Arizona, and so I saw these people who were already doing what I wanted to do, because I didn't think dumping chemicals in the hive was a great plan for anybody. And so I started with 20 packages, and the first 5 years I went from 20 to 6. And that's without trying to catch up. That's no splits, no swarms or anything. So sometimes you'll hear about really high loss rates. It's not necessarily the case. Especially down here, I've heard that bees survive quite well without treatments. But for me, it's really about changing your mindset, realizing what you're a beekeeper for. I tell people, if you're not a commercial beekeeper, don't keep bees like a commercial beekeeper. My philosophy is to teach new beekeepers especially how to do it in a way that you're going to enjoy it and you're going to stick with it for a long time. Because we all know there's a revolving door in beekeeping clubs. You'll have a lot of people start, especially in the spring, and you may only retain 10 or 20% of them for the long term. So if we can get more people who can figure out how to do it and enjoy it for the long term, we'll have more happier beekeepers, and that's what I'm trying to educate. So in that vein, tonight I am going to be telling you about ways to split and increase your hives, because my philosophy is that more is better. And it's not just more hives, it's when you have more hives, when you have the ability to manipulate them better in a larger population, you become part of the feral population of bees. You catch swarms, your hives swarm, you lose swarms back to the environment. And Randy Oliver has done a couple of studies on the genetics of honeybees, the wild versus the kept bees. And he's discovered that the feral bees who aren't treated and who lose hives that can't survive, they actually have better genetic diversity than the kept hives, which are typically come from mass-produced queens. Anyway, so let's get started. One of the most important things that I feel in treatment-free beekeeping is having locally acclimated bees. Now down here, you guys probably don't have too much problem with that. Probably most of the bees that you're going to buy or acquire come from here. There's a lot of swarms available, there's a lot of cutouts available. And so you're able to, oh, thank you. You're able to get bees who are accustomed to this climate. However, there's a lot of this country where bees are not available at the times when people want them. So especially further north, you'll have the vast majority of bees are raised in, the sort of southern crescent of the continental United States, from California to, Georgia or so. And those bees are not very well adapted to the cold. And so you have this thing that happens up north where people will buy packages and then the packages will die almost, in the rate of 60, 70% or more in the first winter. And so most people, they'll buy one, maybe two packages, they'll die, and then the next year they'll think, oh, I must have made a mistake, I'm a newbie, I should try again. And they try again, and they buy another package, and the same thing happens. And maybe they'll get around to year 3, but by that point, if year 3 fails, virtually everybody quits at that point. They think that there's something wrong, something's not working, this is just a waste of money, which it is. So one of my big recommendations is that people don't buy bees at all. Either make splits from your own hives, or catch swarms. You can catch swarms a bunch of different ways. You don't always have to go out there and actively catch the swarm with your person in the box and things. You can make swarm traps, and I encourage you to check out my treatment-free beekeeping YouTube channel, where you can watch videos on how I explain how to make swarm traps so that you can set up swarm traps in your neighborhood or your area and catch yourself some free bees so you don't have to pay for bees anymore. They're really easy to make, and you can do them with materials you probably already have if you have a couple of hives laying around. And for the price that you might pay for a package, you can make 2 or 3 swarm traps, which will last indefinitely. I think it's important, because I feel in my beekeeping experience, and I know a lot of you feel the same way, is that I don't have bees just to have bees, right? I have bees so that I can involve myself in the entire hobby of beekeeping. It's all the things you get to do. It's harvesting honey, it's inspecting, it's you name it, all the stuff, building hives, painting things, pollinating your garden. You have bees not just to have them, but to do all the stuff. And so I feel that learning how to split effectively and efficiently, make more hives, is part of that learning experience. It's if you haven't done it, it's the next thing you can do in your learning experience. One of the things you can start doing with your own bees, and this can be especially important in around here where Africanized bees can happen, is you can start to focus on building traits in your stock, in your bees, or getting rid of traits. Because we all don't like mean hives, but you're much less concerned about trying to save a mean hive or work with a mean hive if you can just replace the queen with one of your own queens from one of your own hives that's much nicer. And that's free. You don't have to buy a queen, bring in something from somewhere else to do that. You can make high quality queens. I'll explain in a little bit when I talk about how commercial queens are made. Commercial queens are not always made the best. It's really, I don't want to directly disparage people, and I can't tell you who to buy from and who not to because of the quality of the stuff, because I don't know. But there are queen producers out there who don't allow a sufficient amount of time for a new queen to begin laying and for her ovaries to properly mature and stuff. And so when she comes to your hive and starts laying, she's got things that are wrong with her, and that will pop up sometimes as quickly as the same summer. She'll be superseded, but there's definitely an epidemic of short-lived queens around these days, and you can avoid that by making your own. And again, it's always, for me, it's about fun. If I'm not having fun doing it, then why should I do it? Right? It's not a job for most of us, it's a hobby. Hobbies are things that we're supposed to do because they're fun, because we enjoy them. So if we're not enjoying them, why are we doing it, right? And if you want, you can do things like sell queens to your friends and neighbors who aren't interested in making their own. And you don't have to charge exorbitant prices. You can. A lot of clubs where I've spoken to, they have actual programs where new beekeepers are kind of on scholarship. They're provided with bees, either at free or much lower cost. So that's a way to support your hobby and pay for your equipment and do things like that. Of course, you can sell honey too, but. So the first thing I focus on with increase is catching swarms. I believe that everybody should be catching swarms. Every beekeeper should be at least have a couple of swarm traps out, if not to catch their own swarms from their own hives, to catch swarms in the neighborhood. And that serves a couple of purposes. Number one, you provide yourself with freebies. And when you have freebies, you're not so worried about losing your bees, right? You know where to get more, they're free, and even if they're not high quality, even if they die, swarms still tend to build comb and bring in honey, and you can get a good harvest the first year, even if they don't survive. But also,
just how far or how close should the traps be to your hives?
to your own hive, you can always put a swarm trap in your own yard, but you're not as likely to catch a swarm from your own hives. If you want to catch a swarm for your own hives, you want to have swarm traps in a radius of a couple hundred yards at least, because the swarm is a reproduction. They want to go a little bit away from their home to start a new home, so they want to be a little bit out. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, if you have any questions, just raise your hand. I will be happy to stop and answer your questions. I don't want anybody to leave not having their questions answered. Okay? All right. What was the second? Oh, the second thing I was going to talk about with swarm traps is that you provide a service to your neighborhood by catching swarms. If you're going to make a swarm trap, that trap is going to be hopefully more enticing to the swarm rather than your neighbor's eave or their wall in their house. Because we all know that when bees get into those places, it requires an expensive removal to be done properly, and it's sort of not nice. We want to keep bees in the good graces of everybody. We want there to be as few cutouts as possible, so that people aren't worried about killing bees. They don't see bees as a pest rather than what they are, which is a beneficial insect. Swarms, I think, are a really easy way to expand. They kind of install themselves if you're working with a swarm trap. They grow quickly. They're generally of good health. Most swarms come from healthy hives, and that's why they're swarming. They've built up, they've made a lot of honey, they've run out of space, they're reproducing. So they're generally healthy bees, and that's a good way to start. And as I mentioned before, with your area, you want to become interactive with the wild bees in your area. And you might not think that there are a lot of wild bees in a heavily developed area, but there's actually way more bees living in houses and trees and things than people understand. There's loads of bees out there. Yeah, especially down here. There's lots of bees. Yes? Yes, a swarm will, if a swarm doesn't have a queen, they will typically return to their hive. So if a queen's wings are clipped, or she can't fly, or something happens, if she gets caught out of the air by a dragonfly or some bird or something, those bees will generally return home. So if it's actually more likely for there to be extra queens in a swarm. Sometimes you'll have extra virgin queens, but yes, a swarm has a queen always. If you catch a lot of swarms, if that's part of what you do as a hobby, you don't even have to split because you're bringing in swarms all the time. I know of a number of beekeepers, and I'm sure there's a number of beekeepers here who do cutouts, who are the same way. You've got so many bees, you don't need to do splitting. You can just keep your cutout bees or keep your swarms. You can requeen the ones that are mean or you don't like. You can combine hives if you get too many. You don't have to worry about splitting. So I know a number of beekeepers who are like, for them, swarm catching is like fishing. It's what they do. Like I'm an aquarist. I have an aquarium. I keep the fish in a tank, right? But a lot of people go out and fish for that part of it. It's related, but it's not the same thing. And the same thing can go with beekeeping. I know guys that just catch swarms, and that's what they're really good at. That's what they do all the time. A good example of one of those is Jason Bruns, and you can find him at letembee.com, letmbee.com. And he's probably the best guy if you want to learn how to catch swarms. He catches, on average, he catches more than one swarm per box every year.
I do have a question regarding swarms. So, by law, when you collect the swarm, as far as I know, you're supposed to kill the queen and replace it with a queen of known genetics. But when you first pick up a swarm, no matter how, with a swarm trap or by vacuum up or cutting them out, and you put them into the hive you have designated for the swarm in your apiary, you don't necessarily find the queen right away. And it happens actually, I guess, quite often, or just with me, that the hive just simply takes off because the queen was in there, but I didn't find her when I put the collected swarm in there. So now I had done the work to collect the swarm, but then they just a day later or two take off because the queen, I guess, was with them and they figured they don't like that place I put them into. So how do you, like, do you put them in with a queen excluder entrance, or
So
like a dial where the queen cannot get out? And what if they, I don't know.
Yeah. So the question is, what do you do when you catch a swarm? Some swarms will want to re-swarm and leave the hive. And I'll talk about the legal part in a second. I find the best way to keep a swarm in a hive without too much disruption is to put a frame of open brood in there. And when I do that, when I put that in with a new swarm, they'll typically stay. Very rarely have I had them leave after that. Your bees here might be a little different. So one of the options you can do is put a queen excluder on the bottom or between the cluster and the exit. That's a little bit more disruptive because the bees have to kind of squeeze through that and they may not like it as much. Or if you have a disc entrance, if your hives have disc entrances that go in the front and you can turn it around, a lot of them, I think all of them have a queen excluder section on the disc entrance. So yeah, there's that. Now, I was informed yesterday that it's Florida law that you have to kill the queen if you catch a swarm.
That's best management practice.
Best management practices?
Requirement. Yeah, it's a requirement. They don't have queen killing police coming by to nab you if you don't do it.
That's a good point.
They're not writing tickets.
Yeah, they're not writing tickets. That's good. I feel this is one of my philosophies on life, and that is the vast majority of laws are moral and necessary. There are a few laws here and there that are not moral or not necessary, and so I leave it to you as adults to make a decision for yourself as to what the actual best practice is.
The rationale is to make sure they're not Africanized? Is that?
I assume that's the rationale. I've also heard the theory that sort of thing is often championed by commercial beekeepers who want to sell more queens. I'm not going to make a judgment on which one of those is actually the case. I'm not.
A little of both down here.
A little of both, yeah. Yeah, and that goes to, and there's also the factor of, you know, if you do break the law, there are penalties sometimes if you go faster than the speed limit. We all go faster than the speed limit occasionally. We only get caught occasionally, and we get tickets occasionally. So the overall idea behind a speed limit is that most of the time people will drive in a way that's not going to kill everybody, right? That's the overall goal. And with beekeeping, and there's other weird laws and stuff that I've dealt with around the country with beekeeping. And it goes for any sort of civil disobedience. You know, if you're willing to handle the punishment, such as it is, then feel free to break the law all you want. No, I didn't say that. I'm not advocating breaking the law. I'm just not, never mind. Looks like we've lost a couple of lines on the top. Okay. So this is good stuff to know before you decide to make your own hives, splits or queens. This is just a good piece of education on the life cycle of the queen. So you probably all have heard how long it takes a worker to progress from an egg to an adult. The queen has a slightly different timeline. So just looking at this, we can figure out which day we want to do grafting or do splitting, or if we split a hive. I'll show you the methods in a bit, but if you want to split the hive and after they make queen cells, you can re-split it again so that you're splitting queen cells between hives. You know when's a good time to do that. And you don't have to take notes. I'm going to post this video on the Treatment-Free Beekeeping YouTube channel like Monday or something. I'll try and do it as quickly as possible. So typically day 1, queen lays the egg. Generally day 4, larvae are hatched and can be moved. Depending on the temperature, you know, insects are cold-blooded. So here where it's nice and warm, it might go a little faster. It might be 3 days, yeah. Day 8 or maybe 7, the queen cell will be capped, and you can generally move a queen cell day 7 or 8 right after she's been capped, or right before she hatches. You don't want to move it in the middle when she's in a more sensitive stage of her development. So day 16 or as early as 14 in worm conditions, the queen will hatch. She will run around the hive eating a lot. Her exoskeleton will harden up. If there are other queens who are emerging at the same time, they'll try and kill each other, often succeed. And once she's done hardening up and her wings have hardened and everything, she's ready to fly, she'll go out and go on mating flights, and those can take, depending on the queen, you know, she might go 1 day, she might go a week. It just all depends. Somewhere around day 25 or maybe earlier here, she'll start laying eggs. But even as late as day 35 sometimes, you'll get queens that'll just start laying eggs. So it pays sometimes to not be too hasty in trying to find where the eggs are. A lot of times she'll just be not ready yet. And then day 46 is the day that I say is the minimum time, and I've heard this from a number of different people, but it's the minimum time you want to let a queen develop and lay eggs to get her ovaries fully developed and healthy. So a lot of times commercial beekeepers, commercial queen producers will remove the queen as soon as she lays eggs at all. So it might be a full 3 weeks before she's really ready. And that causes problems with the ovaries and short-lived queens. I have heard, and again, I don't know this for certain, but sometimes queen producers will not even wait that long. They'll just have a certain schedule. All their stuff is on a certain schedule, and they've got to get the queen cells into the mating nukes on schedule. They don't worry about if there's eggs or not in the mating nukes. They just package up the queen, ship her off, and they absorb the failure if it happens by just replacing the queen for free if they need to. Now that can work, you know, in a lot of businesses that's fine. You know, if you go to your favorite big box store and buy a TV or something, you take it home, it doesn't work, you take it back, they give you another one, right? That's fairly straightforward. But with a queen, a lot of times, if you're trying to replace a queen in a queenless hive, and you get a bad queen, now you have to wait another period of time, and maybe the queen producer is out of queens, so you have to wait longer. And during that time, your hive is queenless, and it might become a laying worker hive, and at that point, it's much more difficult to introduce a queen after that. So. Yeah, it's pretty much impossible. But it can be done. By the way, the easiest way that I've found to handle queen issues, and this requires multiple hives, is if you have a hive that goes queenless or has a bad queen or something, just put one frame of open brood from another one of your hives. And I say frame, it can be top bar if you have a top bar hive, whatever your style is. Just put one frame of brood in there once a week for as long as it takes until the problem fixes itself. With a laying worker hive, the open brood will suppress the laying workers, hopefully for long enough for them to make a new queen, and then once that queen's hatched out, she'll suppress the workers with her pheromones, and you won't have any more problems. And it also, during the period of time when there aren't new eggs being laid in that hive, you're replacing the workers with the new brood that you're putting in. It's not going to be a booming hive, but it can survive. All right, so the basic split, this is generally what a lot of people are talking about when they talk about splits. It's what we call a walkaway split. So the basic idea is that you take the hive and you half and half it, or you can do thirds, or however much you feel you want to do, but generally it's half and half. And you don't even necessarily have to know which hive has the queen. Just make sure that both hives have open brood. And whichever hive doesn't have a queen will make a new queen, and she'll go out and mate, and she'll come back and she'll start laying eggs, and everything will be back to normal. Yeah?
Now, when you do that, do the hives have to be far apart? What's going to keep the bees going back to the original hive?
That's a good question. He's asking, do the hives have to be far apart? What's going to keep the bees from going back to the original hive? Now, generally, you'll end up with more of the bees in the hive with the queen. If you put both hives right next to each other, when you make a split, the hive with the queen in it will get more of the returning workers because they can smell her. One of the other things you can do, if you have the ability, is to move that hive a couple of miles away. And so once they get a certain distance away, they can no longer find their way back to home. Bees follow the polarization patterns of light in the sky. And they have a limited range, and so once they get out of that range, they're lost. And once they're lost, they'll reorient themselves to where they are, and then that's their new home. So one of the things you can do is, if you don't have that space to move that hive a couple of miles away, you can switch the hives back and forth periodically to equalize the workers as they're coming back, the foragers. Now you want to make sure not to do that during the time when we showed earlier when the queen is doing mating flights. Because if she comes back and the hives have been moved, she'll go into the wrong hive and she will displace her mother, the original queen, and you'll now have one queenless hive again. And now at this point there's going to be no eggs in that hive, and so it's going to become permanently queenless. There's a couple other things you can do that way. One of the things that I did back when I was doing that is, instead of making a half and half hive split, I would, if I could find the queen, I would put the queen with, just say 2 or 3 frames of brood, and leave all the rest of the brood with the original hive. And then I would take the queen and move her off to the side, not in the same location. That way, you have the queen in a queen right hive, which is smaller but can rebuild faster. And you'll have all the workers, or most of the workers, and most of the brood in the new hive, and they will recover more quickly because they've got a bigger share of the brood. So that's one of the things. But that requires finding the queen.
And do you fill the hive up with frames, empty frames? Or you take 2 and just see what happens? Or you fill up originally with empty frames?
Yes.
Besides the 2 you put in?
Right. When I say, I'm talking about when you split the hive apart, you refill the rest with empty frames.
It's a real bad idea to have any hives with missing frames.
Yes. Missing frames is going to end with wild comb, and that becomes a mess to clean up.
It's laborsome.
Yeah, that's the whole purpose of frames to begin with. Now the reason why I quit doing this is because I discovered this. This was, I think at the time I had about a dozen hives in my home yard, and I made 4 walkaway splits, and they were all in the back row of the yard. And around about the time when the queens had already hatched, I'd kept track of when I had split the hive, so I knew when the queens were going to hatch. I went out and searched on the ground in front of each of those hives looking for the dead virgin queens, the ones that didn't hatch first. And I found 5 of them. This is natural. This is normal. It's not a bad thing. In beekeeping evolution, it is beneficial for the queen to hatch first. The first queen that gets out is the one who becomes the new queen. She kills the rest of them. However, for us, if we're trying to make efficient splits, it might not be the best plan, because now for nearly a month's worth of work, we've created 1 queen, whereas each hive could have produced as many as 10 or 12. Yeah.
With walkaway splits, what would you say the percentage of success is?
Percentage of success with walkaway splits is going to be totally dependent on your location. I'm not sure what it is here. I've had 80 to 90% success. And if it didn't work out, I would just either give the hive new frames of brood, or just recombine the hive with a weaker hive that has a queen. But so the functions of that are, when the queens hatch out, sometimes in a battle they'll sting each other both, and they'll both die, and so now you've got no queens at all. Or sometimes instead of forming a new hive, the queen will swarm out with the hive and they'll go start a new hive somewhere. Or you can always have a queen on a mating flight get caught by a dragonfly or a bird or something, or maybe she gets lost and she doesn't come back. So there's always going to be that function of failure modes, and that's different. It's a range. In various places that I've been to in the country, it's generally 60 to 80% success, depending on conditions. Depending on how many birds like to eat bees in your area, or dragonflies, or whatever else. Is there anything else that likes to eat bees? Frogs? Lizards? Yeah.
Yeah, but our frogs aren't like yours up there. We got blue toads that sit in front of the hive and sit there, and they will eat hundreds of bees.
Oh, wow.
They get about this big.
That's what toad is that? Boo-foo toad? I've never heard of that. That's interesting. Yeah, you have them?
They're here.
Well, I've seen the lizards running around. I haven't seen any toads. Really? Yeah, check out. Yeah, that can. So if you've got one of those toads sitting there eating bees, and the queen comes back from a mating flight,
That's a fat, juicy one.
she's a fat, juicy one. She'd get eaten just like the rest of them. Did I go back a slide? So another one that I learned about from, I forget the guy's name now, but I call this a shaken swarm, or shaken nuke. What? Mike Palmer? He might have something similar. I didn't get it directly from him. Anyway, so the idea behind this is you're going to remove all the frames from the hive, and you're going to shake them all out in front of the hive, as long as there is a way for them to climb back up in the hive. You don't even have to worry about the queen. She'll usually make it back safe and sound also. And then pick which frames of brood you want. All right, you generally want some open brood. A lot of capped brood in a split is good, because you'll have those new bees hatching out to replace your workforce. And so all those, once you've decided which frames of brood you want to put in the new hive, and this can be a 5-frame or a 10-frame nuke. If you do a 5-frame, you might want to build a little adapter to sit on top of the hive that the 5-frame nuke can sit on top of, with a queen excluder in there. And within just a very short period of time, you can give it a couple hours just to be safe, all those, the very best young nurse bees will crawl up through the excluder and start taking care of the brood in there. So what do we know about young nurse bees? They're very good at feeding new queens. They're also very good at accepting new queens if you want to provide a queen to them. So this is a good way to start a new hive, because the bees that you're working with are going to be the young nurse bees, and they're going to be the most receptive to a new queen. They're going to be the most equipped to make a new queen. Okay? This one's a little fun. This is kind of a nail biter. If you like to catch swarms, or if you are expecting one of your hives to swarm, you can encourage a swarm by not supering a hive. Keep it small. They're going to rapidly run out of space. You can be ready there, check them every couple of days, look for swarm cells. Then you can take those swarm cells with a few frames of brood in stores, and you can make new nukes. Now in this way, instead of making just one new queen with your split, you can do as many as one nuke per queen cell that they make. So you might get 10 or 12. Or if you don't want to cut them out of the frame, you can just take whichever frames have swarm cells on them and make new hives with them. Yes?
How many bees do you need to put in there? Because let's say if I have a 10 framer and I have a whole bunch of queen cells in there, and I disassemble the whole hive, but how do I, first of all, now make sure I get enough bees in each of my splits, and how many is it anyhow? Does a handful or two work, or?
The question is, how many bees do you need for making a split? And that's one of those things that's, again, depending on location. Down here where it's fairly warm, you could probably get away with 2 or maybe even 1 frame of bees. Maybe shake some extra bees in there and have a new nuke. Up where I am, it takes at least 3 frames. And further north, I've heard from other beekeepers in like Wisconsin and Minnesota, it takes a full 5 frame nuke to support a new queen.
How many bees on a frame on average?
I don't know how many bees are on a frame. Does anybody have that number?
On each side, or?
It's about, if it's a strong hive, it's about 1,500 on each side.
1,500 bees on each side of the frame in a strong
Well,
hive.
Well, that's cells.
Okay.
That's the cells, not bees. It's not gonna take 1,500 bees to cover the you know,
I
because
thought it is by.
each side of the frame has 1,500 cells, so there's 3,000 cells on a frame.
4,500. Deep frame.
Deep.
4,500. Right.
Here's what you do. Go home, pull a frame out of your hive, take a picture of it, and count. There's also small cell. Has anybody heard of small cell beekeeping? A lot of people have heard of it nowadays. That's something I've done since the beginning. You're going to have more cells on a small cell frame than regular size. But as far as actually bees on the frame, I don't know. That'd be a good thing to find out. 1,000 per side? That's possible. Yeah.
I always have a problem. I have 3 hives. One has some more queens that's easy to find. The other 2 hives, I just 90% of the time I can't find the queen. But I know she's there, you know, based on the condition of the hive, but it's like impossible. I don't know why. It's like finding Waldo. You know?
Yeah, I find that some people are just better at finding queens than others. For those of you that aren't good at finding queens, it's always a good idea to learn the signs to know that a hive is queen right. If you can pull a hive open and look and see eggs, 1 egg per cell, you know that it's queen right, or at least it was queen right within the last 3 days. So there are other signs, you know, like the typical sign for a laying worker hive is multiple cells or multiple eggs per cell, but that can also show up when you have a brand new queen. So it's not necessarily a foolproof way of finding out. But that's one of those things that I feel that really comes with experience, and it's kind of one of those snap judgments you make when you open a hive or when you look at a hive. The more experience you have, you'll just know that things are well. You know, I don't know, I'm fairly good at finding queens, but not always. And a lot of times I can, when I'm inspecting a hive, I can open it up and I can just glance at a frame and she's not on here. Like the bees aren't acting like she'll be on here. I can't describe to you what that looks like. It's just something that over time I've just learned to see. So that's one of those things. It's really good to get in and, you know, has anybody read the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell? It's a really good book where he explores the idea of snap judgments and how there's parts of your brain that works without your conscious thought about a thing. And you can learn to utilize that more. Yeah. Yes.
When you say a small cell beekeeping, are you talking about the regressed foundationless or actually small cell foundation?
When I say small cell, I specifically refer to 4.9 millimeter cell size. So foundationless, I kind of consider a different thing because natural comb has a wide variety of cell sizes, basically an infinite variety of cell sizes. Oh, marvelous. So I kind of differentiate that just so that we know, just so we keep the terminology separate. And I do both. I do small cell with foundation, and I also do foundationless too. So I think both of them are good. If you have the time to make sure that everything's going well, keeping comb straight, I think foundationless is an excellent idea because it's even cheaper. Yeah, cheaper.
I keep 2 or 3 wax frames in each of my hives, and they usually put the queen cells on those, and you can cut single-handedly out. And
yeah, he was just saying he keeps 2 or 3 wax foundation frames in his hive, and they usually make the queens on those.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that. Thank you. All right, so one of the tools that I like to use in my own personal nukes and queen rearing is the queen castle. Now this is just a diagram that I made up on some CAD program. You can buy queen castles if you're not into making your own equipment. You can buy them from pretty much any beekeeping supply store has them now. But the idea is that you're going to take a normal box and you're going to make dividers that split that box into 3 or 4 individual nukes. And in my case, this is a medium box, so the dimensions are slightly different than a normal box. I made the frame rest a little taller, so we allow a little more room on top of the frames for bees to crawl around. And I also made the overall box taller, so we have a little extra space at the bottom as well. And then for an entrance, I cut a little slot in both sides and the front. And then for ventilation, this is actually, I've discovered is genius. I didn't come up with it, but I drill a 2-inch hole in the back away from where the entrance is. Now that 2-inch hole will smells will waft out of there. And so any robber bees that come along, they're going to follow the smell. They don't know where the entrance is. And since generally the air is going to be coming in the entrance and out the ventilation hole, they'll always pick around that ventilation hole and they'll never be able to find the entrance. And so with these, I have never had one of these robbed out. The robbers just can't find it.
I put a screen over mine.
Yeah, I meant to say, did I not mention the screen? Okay. Should have a screen on it. Otherwise, the whole point of the thing is off.
Or they will find a way.
Yeah, they will find a way. So I just cut a 1/4-inch slot in the sides, and this is on my website, so you can find all the dimensions. It's kind of hard to see here. So if you want to make your own, you can find all the dimensions of these on my website. It's with a 1/4-inch slot, and then this is a piece of 5mm Luan plywood, which fits right in a 1/4-inch slot.
And it's a lot easier to put those slots in it before you assemble the box.
That's true. So anybody with a normal table saw can make a box like this. It's got rabbet joints. It's even easier if you've got a dado blade for your table saw. Or like I said, you can buy them from any beekeeping supply place. This is a 3x3 medium. I don't know that anybody sells mediums. They sell deeps, which are 4x2, four 2-frame nukes. But I like the 3 frames because it gives me a little more space. Allows my queens to lay a little bit longer before they swarm.
Taking a 10-frame box, eliminating one of the frames, and using 9 frames.
Correct.
10-frame box.
Yes.
So you can take a 10-frame box before you assemble it, slice it, and do your thing.
Yes, you can. And then for tops, you can either use, you can slice up boards for that, or you can use like feed bag or canvas or something just to cover over the tops. Because these aren't year-round hives. These are just for mating nukes and stuff like that.
Could you put an excluder on that and just put a super on top? How would it fail?
What's your purpose for doing that?
I think it would just be a way to top the box, and the workers go up and store honey if they want, but they can all come back. Oh, they would cross over. They might cross over.
Yeah, I would.
There'd be a lot of crossover.
I would expect crossover problems, and
your smell not going and making what you need done.
yeah, you're gonna have workers trying to kill other queens sometimes. But try it. That's what I tell people. It's like, well, if I do this, will it work? Well, yeah, try it. I mean, I don't think it'll work, but it might. Tell me what happens.
Where do you take your medium? You take it from the super?
My mediums, I have a mixture. I'm in the process.
You go into that poor thing.
Where do I take the medium frames? Or the box?
They have no eggs in it, just the honey, or what do you think?
Well, I'm starting to use mediums as brood frames also.
Oh.
There's a larger number of people these days using, like Michael Bush's method is using 8-frame mediums instead of deeps. Classically, everybody used deeps for brood chambers. But now a lot of people, hobbyists especially, I don't know that any commercial beekeepers do it, but hobbyists especially are looking for smaller boxes that are easier to lift. So you're starting to see more people using mediums. So that's why I did that.
Otherwise you would just make these.
Yeah. Whatever size frame you use, that's what you should use.
There's a couple commercial guys that actually use 8-frame mediums, but it's the Illinois.
Okay.
Just that little bit. You know, it's like an extra inch taller. It's
Yeah.
Not the 5/8 or whatever, 5 5/8. It's like 6 and something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, the Illinois size. Yeah.
It's just a little bit bigger, and that's what they use for everything.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I've seen
This simplifies things.
a few of those. I've also seen more common now using 8-frame deeps in migratory operations also. 8-frame deeps is an excellent size for swarm traps if you have those around.
Yes.
This is something that might just happen to you just in the course of your beekeeping regular stuff. If you find a queen or find a hive that's in the midst of superseding a queen, you can do kind of similar with what you did with the swarm cells, and divide up those supersedure cells into multiple nukes. So that's one of the things you can do. Oh,
Steel frames from other hives that are strong to have to reinforce them.
yes. That's also another thing you can do. I don't know if I have that one listed. I don't think I do.
Steal the queen from the other hive.
But one of the things you can do is, if you keep a lot of small hives, if you don't want to impact each one of your hives very much, you can take one frame out of each of those hives and create a whole new hive with it. So I've figured out how to do that with 5-frame nucleus hives, because the smaller the hive, it seems the more interested the hives are in growing. And so you can take one frame out of, if you have 5 nukes, you can take one frame out of each one to start a new nuke. And you can do that once every week or two, all during the active season. And at the end of the active season, you can have a lot more than you started with, because it increases exponentially. You know, when you go from 5, once you get to 10, now you can make twice as many nukes every week, and it goes on up. Oh, something I think I forgot to mention with the queen castles. The main purpose of the queen castle is to have a small nucleus hive or a mating nuke that has the same type of frames that you use everywhere else. Most mating nukes that are sold are either half-size frames or mini tiny size frames. And once you get to the end of the season, there's not really a whole lot you can do with them. They don't fit anywhere. But when you're using your regular frames, when you're done producing queens or making splits or whatever, you have a the queen doesn't come back from mating, you can just put all those frames back into one of the other hives. You're using the same size frame throughout everything.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So, because you were talking about how many bees to put into each new split when you have multiple queen cells. So, if I have multiple queen cells, can I just put them in a queen castle, even though it's the same bees, like in the same hive? Will they now orientate themselves to the designated hive entrance?
Yeah, only the forager bees will go back to the original hive. So if you shake off a bunch of nurse bees into those new nukes, most of them will stay there. So it's only the forager bees that go back to the original hive. When you split those hives up, that's why you can shake out bees and put the frames back in the old hive, and a lot of those bees will stay. The foragers who have been outside, they know where they're going, they'll go back to the original hive location.
So don't put the queen castle down where the original hive was at.
No, don't put the queen castle where the original hive was at. I don't think.
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out if I have a 10 framer and I have a whole bunch of queen cells in there, if I can basically just replace that hive box with a queen castle and now just transfer 9 frames and maybe have 1 or 2 frames in each section of that queen castle with those queen cells. So it's still the same hive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
But so you're saying not to leave it.
I think what would happen in that case is depending on where your entrances are on that queen castle, if they're all in the front, which you could do, then the bees would probably return and go in evenly between them. But generally with the queen castles, we put the entrances on opposite sides so the queens don't accidentally come back to the wrong one. And so the one with the entrance on the front is going to get all the bees, and then they'll probably swarm, whereas the ones on the sides won't. See what I'm saying? That would be what I would expect to happen. Any other questions before I go on? How are we doing on time? What am I supposed to be? Okay, I rarely go under time, so it's not a... Okay, so what we want to do when we increase our efficiency, we're going to get into more of the commercial type methods. Of course, the commercial methods are the commercial methods because they're more efficient, because commercial beekeeping is about making money, right? So it's like a factory. Things become more efficient. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that same hive that might have made us 1 queen or a couple, but most of them got killed off by the first queen that hatched out, and we're going to manipulate it so that we get to keep all of those queens. Or we're going to manipulate it so that they make more queens than they would naturally, and then we're going to try and keep all of those queens. So that's the basic idea. So the typical commercial method is they will make up queen cells, queen cell bars. They will graft day-old larvae into those queen cell bars. And if you want more detail on this stuff, there's lots of videos and stuff on how this is done. Then they will use a queenless cell builder nuke, which can be done quite a number of different ways. Michael Bush's website, bushfarms.com, has a bunch of these different methods listed out, which come from the early days of modern beekeeping, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he actually has some of those old books from those old beekeepers still published on his website. So if you don't have to buy, just so everybody knows, and he'll tell you this too, you don't have to buy his books. Just go to the website, you can get all of it there. Or if you want to buy the books, get them signed, whatever, you can do that too. But beekeeping really hasn't changed that much in the last 125 years. And so all those old books are still good. They still teach you the same methods that they do now. The major difference between then and now is they didn't have plastic queen cups back then. They made them out of wax. And I've learned how to make them out of wax myself. Yes?
Sullivan, we didn't pay him to do this, but Michael Bush is coming here in October.
Oh, great.
He'll be
Awesome.
here. So thank you.
Yeah, if he'll bring books and everything, so if you want to buy them, you can get them signed and do all that stuff. He's a good guy. He deserves all of it. He's a good guy. I don't have a book.
Yeah.
I do have a book. I've actually written 2. Neither of them are finished. And I just haven't gotten around to finishing. Yeah. Anyway, one day. You can tell how concerned I am about getting it done. So they'll make a queenless cell builder nuke, and that will start 50 or more queens in each one of those nukes. They'll be jam-packed full with young nurse bees, because those are the ones that make the royal jelly. Then they'll separate out the cell builders. Sometimes, the different operations do it differently. Some of them use a queen-right cell builder to finish up the frames, or finish up the queen cells. Some of them use queenless ones. I find especially the queenless methods are volatile, so if you're trying to make up a queenless nuke, sometimes it'll want to swarm on you. That's the problems that I've had trying it that way. And then they use the mini mating nukes. What they'll do is they'll dump a cup of bees in one of these mini mating nukes, which has a couple of bars. Wooden bars are usually made out of styrofoam, and a little feeder, and they'll dump a couple bees in there and a queen cell, and the bees will start making some little comb. The queen cell will hatch, the queen will go mate, and they'll try and cage her up and ship her off before she can lay that tiny little nuke, which is not much bigger than a grapefruit, because she lays it full of brood, and then she's going to want to swarm. So it's part of the volatile nature of it. So one of the things about drones, I get a lot of questions about drones, especially in treatment-free beekeeping, about controlling the area. I think there's sort of an idea that you have to control the area. You know, you have to flood the area with your drones so that they're breeding with your queens, and you can keep bees treatment-free, because you have to have, everything has to come together so that you can have this perfect treatment-free bee. I do not believe in the perfect treatment-free bee. Bees, by their very nature, are, well, the queen mates with 20 or more drones, so there's a lot of genetic variability. And but I do like to allow my hives to build as many drones as they want. I don't think it's very beneficial to try and prevent hives from making drones. I use foundationless frames. So I put a foundationless frame in a hive, and they'll generally fill it up with drone comb, and they can make all the drones they want. And those drones are then going to be in my area, and they're going to mate with hopefully my queens, but also everybody else's queens too. I also have this theory, I have not been able to prove it, that naturally raised drones are smaller, therefore faster, and mate, or better competing, mating with the queens in your area. Not only your queens, but everybody else's queens also. And some of that's backed up by Randy Oliver's research, that the feral bees tend to genetically encroach on the kept bee population, whereas the kept bee population is not as good at going into the feral population. They don't compete as well as the feral bees do. So it's really, yes?
I was under the impression that the queen would get away from the drone from her hive and fly farther out, too far from the drone base. Since I see it that way, I didn't realize that their own drone would mate with the drone.
The drones won't mate with their own queen. At the very worst, they'll mate with their sister. That's the first thing. I've heard from several researchers at this point who say that in the past, that idea was that the queen would fly out and find drone congregation areas, but people have also observed queens flying over the bee yard mating up there too. So it's not totally clear, I think, at this point, which of those happens, if not both. There is obviously, I think, some measure of inbreeding, but bees are already so genetically diverse that unless you're controlling a very specific area with one very limited population of drones, inbreeding almost never happens. I've heard of only a few cases, and it's usually a commercial beekeeper who tries to concentrate things too much. And here, in a place like this, where you have no natural barriers to bees flying around, I don't think it's even possible. You're going to have bees coming and going. Usually that sort of thing happens in like isolated valleys and things. Yeah.
Talking about the drones and the study that they've done in Florida, the Africanized or the Scutellata drones, they've already shown get a higher percentage of getting to the queen in the drone congregation areas down here. I'm not sure if that's the opposite of what you had just said.
No, that's the same as I'm saying.
They've proven that, you were talking about the smaller ones, and
Yeah.
I don't know if the size has anything to do with it, but they have proven the Africanized genetic drones are getting more tail than the European.
They're
Faster,
just
more
gonna
aggressive
fast
in the
first.
congregation
Yeah,
areas.
they're getting to the tail first. Yeah. No, that's exactly the point. That's the Africanized bees are typically smaller. You're right. It's different. Natural sized bees are somewhat smaller than the commercially available foundation, especially the larger sizes. How much smaller is totally variable. That's why when D. Lesby came up with the small cell 4.9 millimeter, that's actually sort of a trade-off. It's kind of an average rather than a specific size, right? And so you'll see a lot of guys that do cutouts. When I say guys, I mean that in a gender non-specific term.
Guys or gals.
Guys or gals.
And we don't encourage cutouts.
You're the president. No, I wouldn't recommend cutouts, especially for new beekeepers either. I've heard of people, guys who have done it. I haven't heard of girls who have done it. I've heard of guys who have done it, and it's one of those trial by fire things. It's one of those stories that you never forget. But where was I?
Different size cells.
Yes. I've heard, yeah.
I've seen bees that are very, very short and small. I've seen bees that are huge.
Yeah. Cutouts anywhere from the range of worker cells all the way down to maybe 4.4 millimeters, all the way up to maybe 5.5 or 5.6 millimeters. So there's huge variability, huge range, and I think that's all good. So yeah, don't discourage drones. Make lots of drones. There's no real downsides. I noticed this year, especially because I was looking for it. I don't know that I'd ever looked for it in the past. But looking through my hives, I would look at frames in different times of the year, observe how many worker cells are filled. I'm talking about brood comb here, and how many drone cells are filled, if there was drone cells on the same frame. And early in the season, they're really wanting to make drones, and so they're trying to fill up a lot of drone cells. Later in the season, when they've got plenty of drones, I've seen just empty drone cells just sitting there. Meanwhile, the brood cells are still
Filled with honey.
or filled with honey. Exactly. So I think when the bees want to make drones, they want to make drones. They'll build drone comb between the frames. When they don't want to make drones, you can't make them. So
I think there's a happy balance.
yes, happy balance.
And if they're making drones, they're happy and they feel comfortable. But if you take the drone away from them, they become more stressed.
Yeah, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of people saying that. Yeah, bees are happier when they have drones.
So
till winter, and then they kick them all out. So this is my method. This is a method that I've developed as sort of something that works well for a small beekeeper, for a backyard beekeeper with a handful of hives. So you can make a decent number of queens, you know, a couple of dozen at the most per cycle if you want to. Or you can just make 5 or 10, or you can just make a few. And you can do that without really disrupting a hive. So you'll still get your queen, you'll still get your honey production. Everything will still generally move along as it normally does. You're not putting a big stress on the hive. There's not a big disruption. So first I'm going to start on day 1. I'm going to prepare my queen right cell builder. And so what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to find one of my hives in the yard that's nice and strong, preferably gentle. And I can, if I want, I can have that queen be the mother, or I can take queens from one of the, eggs or larvae from one of the other hives, or I can do a mix, or however I want to do it. And so what I'll do is I will take I'll show you this next picture. I'm going to take my, I'm going to make a cell builder box, and I'm going to make these 2 frame dummies. They're just boxes made out of plywood that sit in there like a frame does, and it's just to take up the space so that I can concentrate the flow of bees and resources through that box, through the middle where the queens are. Unfortunately, now I can't go back. No, I can't go back. And you don't necessarily have to have the frame dummies in there. It's just helpful. You can do it the other way. You could do it with full frames of honey or something else. You're just trying to concentrate the flow of bees through this area where the queen cells are, because you want the queen cells to have really good supply of royal jelly. Make big fat queens. Also on that first day, I will put an empty frame of comb, drawn comb, in the brood nest right in the middle. And generally, when new comb appears in a hive, the queen will lay that comb full of eggs very soon after it shows up. So then on day 4, when I come to graft, I have a full frame of the right-sized, right-aged larva for grafting. We'll talk about grafting in a minute. So I graft the larva into the queen cups. If I've got the timing wrong, or there was cold or something, I can always go pick larvae from somewhere else, from another hive. Wherever I want those larvae to come from, I can get them. Very flexible. So then I'll put that back in there. There showed you there's a queen excluder. This is your normal hive. If you've got multiple box hives, you just make sure the queen is in here, queen excluder, put everything else that's left over up top. This shows 4 frames. I have 5 frames in mine because I measured wrong. But I find it works pretty well because, you know, my OCD kicks in and I have 2 frames on either side, and anyway. The original, you can find a full write-up of how to do this. My explanation here is going to be woefully inadequate, I realize. You can find a full write-up of this on my website. You can also find the original material. This picture comes from davecushman.net. Dave Cushman was a British beekeeper who passed away a while back, but someone maintains his website with all this information. And the original name of this method is the Ben Hardin method. Ben Hardin, I believe, is still alive. He's getting pretty elderly, but this method was developed originally as a royal jelly production method because you can do it continuously. You can harvest. What they do is they'll harvest the queen cells, scoop out the royal jelly, put new larvae in there, and they'll can be continually refilled.
Excuse me, could you repeat those names? DaveCushman.com.
DaveCushman.net. And the name of the method is the Ben Hardin method. There's
E or not?
E, H-A-R-D-E-N. I think I have the most extensive write-up of it. It's not very common. I've heard of other people doing it, but it's not a very common thing. All right, back to my list. So I put the queen cups back into the hive above the queen excluder, and I put open brood right next to it, and then plenty of pollen and stores right there as well, so that the nurse bees are going to have plenty of supplies to feed those new queens. On day 13, and you can also, if you go on my website, there's a Excel spreadsheet that you can download that you can put in the date of the graft, or the day that you do the split, however you want to do your splits, and it will tell you when all these things happen.
Okay, I think I missed a spot when you had the queen right on the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
and you got your frames up top. Now you drop your bar of cups down in between,
Right?
and then on each side you put open brood? Or you
Open
put-
brood and pollen, especially on either side of that.
Okay, is it well-aged open brood, or
Um,
they'll draw queen cells on that?
You want as young as possible. They're not going to draw queen cells on that, and I'll tell you why. Those frames have been recently walked on by the queen. Her scent is still there. And so they don't recognize that as a queenless situation. But that queen cell bar has not been down where the queen is. And so they will recognize those queens as, since they're already started, they'll just kind of continue them. They won't. See, one of the things that Mike Bush talks about is that bees think collectively, which is something we're not really good at. So when like when you're walking down the sidewalk and you come to where there's no sidewalk left, you don't start building another sidewalk, right? Bees, on the other hand, do. They do everything collectively. So they're coming along, they see a queen cell that's already been started, it's got a larva in it. There's not a whole lot of thinking that goes on. They just do the next job that comes to them. Well, we got to feed that thing. We're going to, as it gets bigger, we're going to make the cell bigger, and then when time comes, we're going to close it. They just do the next thing. And that's triggered by a whole different set of senses than we are. We're mostly visual, auditory creatures. Selfish? Bees, on the other hand, communicate much more through scent, a little bit of sound, a lot of feeling things around, touching, tasting. So they think totally different than we do. And it's good for us to try and figure out how they think, but at the same time we have to realize that they don't think like us. So yeah, that's a good point though. They're not going to build new cells on those frames because they don't recognize the hive as being queenless. But these cells they'll work on because they don't have the queen scent on them. So it's more or less like they're assuming that there's a supersedure going on. And if you don't harvest the queen cells at the right time and they hatch, they will replace your queen if they can get through the queen excluder, which sometimes virgin queens can. So, say again?
Would it swarm, the box?
I haven't had one swarm. I'm not going to say that it won't. If it wants to swarm and you're doing this other stuff, it's probably going to try and swarm. It's just going to continue that process anyway. But I don't think this has ever triggered a swarm unless you get to the point where you've left the queen cells in too long. Because they're not, swarming is a whole hive operation triggered by a number of different things. If you want an excellent book to read about how all that happens is Honeybee Democracy by Tom Seeley. He contends that swarming is triggered by returning foragers who are full of nectar who don't get unloaded. And so once there's enough of those who don't get unloaded, that actually is what triggers a swarm. I could be totally botching that, but anyway. So on day 13, I'm going to create new nukes in my queen castles. I'm going to go find some hives I'm going to start with my worst hives first. If I got a really bad hive, maybe it's only got a couple frames of brood, it just hasn't done anything all year, I'm going to go in there. The queen will probably be easy to find because there's only a couple frames of brood. I'll squish her, I'll take those brood frames, and I'll stick them in a nuke. And then I'll work the rest of the way up into larger hives. Maybe this hive hasn't done fantastically, but I don't think they're worth squishing the queen. I'd like to keep the hive, maybe give it another year to try again. But I'm going to take most of its brood, and I'm going to put the brood with the bees on it, not the queen, in a mating nuke. And I'm going to wait for tomorrow, and I'm going to put queen cells in there. So in that way I can get rid of my worst hives, and I can use hives that aren't going to produce any honey. I can use them to produce brood, and so they continue to be productive even though they haven't made any honey. Day 14, I'm going to take the ripe queen cells out of the cell builder, and I'm going to place them one, maybe two if I have some extras, in each one of those nukes. Generally I want a nuke to have at least one frame of brood, one frame of honey. Maybe 2 frames of brood for my area works better. Down here maybe you don't need so much.
Can't hurt.
Can't hurt though. If you're working with 3 frame nukes, just fill it up. In Arkansas I didn't have much of a problem. I would just put 1 frame of brood, 1 frame of honey, and 1 frame of foundation, and that was usually good enough. And then after that, it's just a waiting game. So as we saw on the calendar earlier, the queen hatches out, she goes out and mates, she comes back, starts laying the hive full of eggs. You want to keep a good eye on that, because if she lays up the whole thing and you've got too many bees in there, she's going to want to swarm. I've had that happen plenty of times. So there's a happy medium. You don't want to load this nuke up with bees, but you don't want to have not enough bees so that they can't keep it warm. Again, down here, warm usually isn't a problem. So from there, you're going to have a certain percent of your mating nukes where the queen comes back and starts laying. Those are good to go. You're going to have a certain percent where the queen doesn't come back or she doesn't start laying. And from there, you can start combining those 3-frame mating nukes into 5-frame mating nukes. And if you're selling queens or you're giving queens to your friends or using them to re-queen other hives that you have, you can take 2 5-frame mating nukes. When one of them has a good queen, you now have a 10-frame hive. And if you do it right, like when I was in Arkansas, I was selling queens, and so I could generally work it out so that at the end of the year, one of those 5-frame nukes now was a double deep 20-frame hive by combining and putting everything together. So that left me full-size hives that were completely ready to go for winter at the end of the year. And I sold some queens and I sold some nukes, and everything worked out pretty well. Oh, here's the frame blanks. They're just, if you measure a frame, the height, and measure how wide they are, they're 1 inch 3/8 wide. So you can do, these are, you can kind of see some of the dimensions I wrote on them. These are 2.5 frames wide. They're the normal depth of a frame and normal length of a frame. They're just 1/2-inch plywood, so that the 1/2-inch plywood ear just sits on the frame rest just like a normal frame does. I hope this will play. Those of you who are afraid of grafting, I was afraid of grafting. I was. For a long time, I thought that grafting was going to be too hard. But once I tried it, I realized it was really not that bad. As long as you can see. If you can't see, there are also ways to do it, like the Nycot queen rearing system, which is the same as the Man Lake graftless system. That's a really easy way to get larvae and the whole system works pretty well. It's going to cost a little bit more. I think the kit costs like $130, is it? Around there. But grafting tools cost, the Chinese grafting tool, which is the one I use, I think that you can get them for like $4 or $6, and they work pretty well. You don't really have to see, you just kind of look in there, you can see, okay, it's in there, and okay, I got it. If I didn't get it, try again. The thing about grafting larvae is there's a whole bunch of them in there, so if you mess it up, you can do it over. You don't have to worry about it. There's lots of them in there. So this is like a 12 or 13-year-old girl. So if she can do it, you can do it. And the other thing, I realized conceptually grafting is basically like taking a tiny spoon, scooping up a tiny Cheerio out of a tiny bowl, and putting it in another tiny bowl. That's it. All you got to do is make sure not to flip the Cheerio over. Because honeybee larvae, they lay in the bottom of the cell in a C shape, and if you flip them over, they drown. So you just got to keep them the right way up. All right, let's see if this will play.
Breathe out of one side.
Yeah, they breathe out of one side. It's kind of off. Whoops. No, go back. All right, right now she's just priming the cells with royal jelly. This is an optional step. It does help grease the process. And there she goes. She's scooping up the larva and sticking them in the cell. She can do one about every 3 seconds.
Child labor camp.
Yeah. So I've been doing it for about, let's see, I think I started doing it in 2011, so about 7 years. And I can do one every 10 or 15 seconds. So not as fast, but since I'm only making, I generally will graft about 45 cells in one cycle of this. And through the various processes, I usually end up with somewhere between 20 to 30 queens. That's okay, it always happens. Anyway, so grafting is not hard. If you have your own bees already, get yourself a grafting tool and just go out there and see if you can scoop up the smallest larvae you can find. Once you do that, I mean, there's nothing to be scared of. It's really very easy. So here's some of the queen cells that I made. As you can see, not all of the cells are developed. So I start with 45. Usually get about 30 or so to take, plus or minus. And out of that, when the mating process is done, 20 to 25 mated queens. I also sometimes I use these. These are queen cell protectors. And I mostly use them just because they got these little prongs on them. I can stick them in between 2 frames and they stay in there really well. Go out and get them out later when it's done. But you can also skip that.
Your own wax cup?
Yes, I am making my own wax cups. These are not ones that I made. These are, you can buy wax cups from Rossmann apiaries. They cost like $9 for a pound. They're really not a problem. But you can also buy, there's a company, I think it's something like Hudson Valley Beekeeping Supply or something like that. And they sell a little silicone mold that you can make your own queen cups with. And it's as simple as heating some wax up in a I've got a mini crock pot, and I just take a syringe and I suck some out of there, some wax, and dump it in the little cells. And then it dries or hardens, and then you just, wiggle the silicone. Any of you that have made candles with silicone molds, it's fairly straightforward. And I like I don't have anything wrong with plastic ones. Plastic, I think most people use plastic. But I can melt these back down and make more. And they're part of the natural process. I'm not adding plastic to the world or getting plastic in my system. So I like the wax ones. I don't know if they work better or worse. They work fine.
How do you get the syringe back to liquid? You just dunk it back into the hot wax?
Yeah, it just sits in there. If I take it out, it'll get hard and it won't work anymore, so it just sits in there.
Oh, okay.
You could also, there's probably a better way to do it. There's a wax tool that's made out of metal that you hold your thumb over the hole and you can pick it up and it stays liquid better. But that costs money, so I didn't do that. I wanted to buy one, but I just never got around to it. And I had it's just a really cheap syringe from a pharmacy that they gave us for my kids when they were taking medicine or something.
Probably an ear syringe.
Ear syringe, probably right, yeah. So this is an example of one of my finished queen castles. Just basic, simple stuff. You can see the entrances here and here. Just enough for about 2 bees to get in there side to side. You don't need a big entrance at all. Remember, there's a 2-inch hole back here that's screened over that provides all the ventilation that they'll need. And then the top is just a 1x6 that's cut down to fit. And this is 2mm plywood.
Then you put a regular lid over top of it.
Yeah, then a regular lid on top of that.
But that's a deep, no?
This is a medium,
Medium?
but my deeps are the same.
Yeah.
In fact, my mediums are just cut down deeps because I made 10 deeps originally and I cut 3 of them down to mediums. The only difference with the deeps is that the entrances are actually holes drilled in the sides. But I figured it was much easier since I was already cutting them down with the table saw to just cut a little slot. And here's an example of a 5-frame nuke. These are regular plywood nukes that you can find plans for online. You can make about 4 nukes, a little over 4 nukes out of 1 sheet of plywood. So it ends up being very cost effective. And again, these aren't really year-round things. These aren't good to leave out when they're not being used. Plywood is not as durable in rain and whatnot. So when these are not being used, definitely store them. But they're really cheap to make, especially if you can find scraps of used plywood from other projects or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I have for this topic. You can find all my talks I put online, so that if you have any questions, anything you saw here that you didn't remember, you want to go back and double check, you can find that on my YouTube page. And I will stick around for questions as long as you want. I'll be hanging around. I don't want anybody to go home. Yeah.
Hey, listen, I just heard tonight on the news about this plume and the red algae, the tide, and all of this stuff having an effect on the bees in South Florida because it's getting sucked up in the plants and the bees are eating, you know. So I just wanted to, I don't know if anybody's having any problems, how far south they are, or if that.
Yeah, I hadn't.
Any problems, but the green plumes we have and the red tide, algae, and all of that is supposedly affecting the bees in South Florida. I just heard it tonight.
Okay, yeah, red tide and algae blooms and things affecting bees. I don't know anything about that because I'm not from here, but definitely look into that and check, make sure that's not a problem for you. All right, thank you all. Have a good evening. Oh, yeah.
Let's talk up the workshop.
I also have a podcast. You can find all the addresses of stuff here. There's business cards over there with all the addresses of things. We're going to be doing a workshop or whatever it's called at Kevin's house tomorrow. What time is that, Kevin? 1 o'clock at Kevin's house. We've lost power. I think it died. Thank you all.